Bad weather and aftershocks are hampering rescue efforts in the country's east. Hundreds are still stranded 2 days after the biggest earthquake to hit Taiwan in 25 years. Despite the damage, the country hasn't seen widespread devastation. We look at why. Also ahead, simulating war. U.S. policymakers imagine how a cross-strait conflict could play out. Plus,
I take to the water with the Canoe Club, racing to connect Austronesian cultures around the globe.
welcome to TaiwanPlus. I'm Betty Chen. Rescue teams have temporarily suspended their operations in Taroko National Park in eastern Taiwan due to excessive rain and aftershocks reaching up to 5.4 in magnitude. The official death toll stands at 10. 2 more bodies have been discovered, but authorities are waiting to verify their identities before adding them to the figure. Rescue teams had been searching for people stranded after the magnitude 7.2 earthquake that shook the area on Wednesday. The quake caused multiple rock slides and fallen boulders have blocked mountain roads. Over 1,100 people have been injured, 18 remain missing, and over 600 people are stranded in Taroko and in Hualien County, the epicenter of the earthquake. Our reporter Rick Cloward has been following developments from the Disaster Response Center in Hualien. Rick, we understand that rescue efforts have been affected by conditions on the ground. Could you please tell us more?
It's been a long day here at the Disaster Response Center, and conditions here are now deteriorating, hampering those rescue efforts in the national park. We've seen the weather getting much worse now. It's raining, and also there's been large aftershocks. The rescuers here have said that they have been forced to evaluate the operations going on in the mountains around here. I've been speaking to the people rescued and those still waiting for news. Back to safety. These tourists were trapped for 2 days in Taiwan's central mountains after the largest earthquake in 25 years struck the country. But there are more people still to be rescued. For these families, it's an anxious wait for news of missing loved ones.
在心里一直祷告他们，祈祷他们，叫朋友帮忙祷告，集众人的力气，帮他们，希望他们平安。
Dozens are still missing in this national park. The magnitude 7.2 quake hit just kilometres from here, bringing landslides down the mountains and sending boulders crashing onto hiking paths and roads. This is the main disaster response centre. It's working against time and battling deteriorating weather and continued aftershocks. But the professionals here, many of whom have trained for such an eventuality for years, are determined to get everyone out safely. Rescuers have made contact with many of those stranded in the area's hotels and on its hiking trails. Others have been airlifted to safety. 64-year-old Kathleen McCatherine is visiting from the US. She was driving in the national park when the earthquake hit.
So we just stayed where we were, and we just basically hugged each other thinking that we could die because rocks were coming at us from every direction.
Emotions are running high in this disaster response centre as rescuers and waiting relatives prepare for another long night ahead. There's a sense of calm professionalism amongst the rescuers here at the centre. We've seen a steady stream of helicopters going past. They've been delivering food and supplies to people still trapped on the mountains and also rescuing people and bringing them back to the city. Meanwhile, in the city, there's been operations to take down the damaged buildings and make them safe.
Thank you, Rick. That was Rick Gloward reporting from the Disaster Response Center in Hualien. The ashes of over 100 people interred at a Hualien Memorial Hall have been spilled after the earthquake damaged their final resting place. It's an added blow to local families, coming just as Taiwan marks the Tomb Sweeping Festival, honoring ancestors. Wesley Lewis reports.
Wednesday's magnitude 7.2 earthquake in Hualien proved too strong for this local memorial hall. The shaking broke open hundreds of urns, scattering human remains across the floor. The destruction came just 1 day before the Qingming, or Tomb Sweeping Festival, a time of year when people visit the graves of their ancestors. Families trying to get information about their loved ones' remains found the hall closed. As workers clean up, relatives are left to wait for more news.
当然是会担心，这个是天灾地变啊，对，这个也很难避免啊，然后就看他们怎么做。
Local officials have ideas about what to do with ashes that have become mingled. They're also offering help for people who want to perform religious rites intended to comfort disturbed spirits of the departed.
分享谁跟谁可能有一点瓶颈的部分，我们原则上会跟家属来做协调，共同的来做法会。有需要立神主牌的，我们也可以在慈云山提供神主牌。
One proposal is to rebury the remains together with a memorial marker. But talks with the families concerned won't get underway until Monday, after the tomb sweeping holiday weekend. That means that for this year, families are left without a way to perform the usual ceremonies at an important time for remembering those they've lost. Ryan Wu, John Van Trieste, and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
While Wednesday's quake has caused damage to buildings and roads, there's been no widespread devastation. John Van Trieste explains why.
Days after one of the strongest earthquakes in Taiwan's recorded history, the damage is relatively light. This building near the epicenter in eastern Taiwan is one of just a few that's beyond salvaging, and all but one of its occupants have survived. Engineers say Taiwan's building codes are to thank for that. The last time an earthquake of similar strength hit Taiwan, September 21, 1999, over 2,000 people died. It was a moment of national trauma. In Taiwan, the very date, 9/21, still has the kind of horrific connotations dates like 9/11 have in other countries. The event triggered serious changes to regulations and retrofitting projects. This time, most of the confirmed deaths are the result of rock slides, not building collapses. And the buildings that did collapse this time were built before the newer rules. Mandates like more robust steel bars appear to have saved lives. Still, engineers say, contractors may be tempted to cut corners.
台湾的建筑基本上都要做到抗震，因为有基本法规，只是说法规规定是法规规定，那设计它一定会设计足够的钢筋量，可是重点在采发营造的时候用最低价嘛，那最低价就不可能会有最好的品质嘛，所以当然品质就会扣分，主要风险在这里。
But it's older buildings without proper reinforcements that are especially at risk. Historic buildings, including listed heritage sites, suffered significant damage. At this Japanese colonial-era temple, 17 kilometers from the epicenter, sacred statues have shattered, and wooden framing has come loose.
像这个上方已经严重的脱水。对，剧烈摇晃之下，左右摇晃之下都脱损了啊。对，像这个这原来的它的卡的地方已经都脱落了。
At this historic sugar factory in Taichung, a smokestack already awaiting repair now needs fast action to fix new cracks and fissures.
在这一段可能会有一阵期间先把它封闭起来，所以我们现在没有让游客进去到里面。
In all, 59 sites under various levels of protection need repairs and are awaiting special government funding. Taiwan has made important progress on earthquake preparedness in the last 25 years. But when it comes to older buildings especially, the country's still not immune to heavy damage. Joseph Wu and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
The earthquake hit right before a long weekend, and many businesses along the East Coast were gearing up for a busy few days. But a holiday rush has ground to a halt, as Tiffany Wang now reports.
A historic hotel in eastern Taiwan, devastated by the magnitude 7.2 earthquake that hit the country 2 days ago. For many hotels in the area, the quake has put a halt to business, right at the start of an anticipated travel rush. It's the Tomb Sweeping Festival holiday weekend.
后续有人打电话进来，或是运用网络来定位的订房的，我们都直接跟他说，我们现在没有办法营业。那已经有付定金的，我们都会在下个礼拜一正式上班之后，会把这些相关的资料会全额的退款。
Attracted by its natural sights, many tourists flock here to Hualien. But hotels are only at 25% capacity, a sharp decrease from the original 75% booking rate before the earthquake. Many properties are undergoing inspections and repairs, and a major road into the county is still blocked by landslide debris. While train services have resumed, some tourists are still unwilling to travel as aftershocks continue to shake the region. Hoteliers are trying their best to adjust to their guests' needs.
清明年假期间，因为地震关系无法前来的客人，我们所有的会员饭店大家也都提供了弹性的做法，包含免费退费，或者是可以选择保留定金使用，3到6个月。
Further down the East Coast, which usually requires travel through Hualien, other businesses that rely on tourists are feeling the impact.
很多旅行社本来是连假要来这边骑车的，昨天取消了，5组客人，少了300多个游客。
影响非常的大，至少影响了5-6成的生意。
Recovery to businesses on the East Coast will take time, but they hope that by the next holiday season, they'll be back to normal. Dolphine Chen and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Stay with us here on TaiwanPlus. The rest of the day's news is just ahead, including how are schools in the Philippines dealing with an extreme heat wave. We find out after the break.
过人生的话，你发现说我们大部分都是爱美的。
我自己少遇见一朵花，我可能就不是这个样子。
开始思考什么叫做一个本土性，
大声的唱出来说我是台湾人。
At a time when the world feels more divided, a platform for diverse voices to come together. I'm Divya Gopalan. Join the dots. Be part of the conversation. Connected where opinions matter.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Could the U.S. help Taiwan stop an all-out invasion from China? That's what a think tank in Washington is trying to figure out through tabletop war games. TaiwanPlus was granted exclusive access, and as our reporter Hamil Khan finds out, not all games have a winner.
With a roll of the dice, the U.S. and China are now at war over Taiwan. That's the scenario of this war game designed by U.S. military officials and leading security experts in Washington, D.C. They're playing to see what could happen in a hypothetical conflict. The year is 2026, and China is about to conduct one of the largest amphibious invasions in history. The attack starts with missile strikes on not just Taiwan, but also neighboring countries like Japan.
Very often the Chinese will attack the Japanese on the first or second turn. When they see what's happening here, U.S. forces forward deployed, they'll attack then Kadena, and if they figure, well, okay, if we're going to go after Kadena, and if we're going to bring the Japanese into the war, we might as well go after their other bases and their ships also.
The U.S. and Japan lose dozens of aircraft and a handful of ships, as many Japanese bases near Taiwan are targeted. After the pieces are moved and losses recorded, it's now Team U.S. and Japan's turn to make their move. Even with the U.S. caught off guard by the attack, it's still able to inflict a significant amount of damage to the invading Chinese force.
Okay. So on the first turn, when the United States really isn't able to bring a lot of combat power to bear, they've still been able to sink 12 Chinese ships. 12, and with 3 more here, that comes out to be about 18.
Okay.
So the Chinese are taking a lot of casualties over time.
During the next few turns, Team China manages to blockade Taiwan and lands troops on the southern beaches of Taiwan. They also sink a U.S. aircraft carrier and target more U.S. forces, but this time on the island of Guam, which is home to one of the largest U.S. military bases in the Western Pacific.
It's a balancing act of having the presence, right, as a deterrent, but at the same time recognizing that, you know, if Guam isn't, you know, on the top of the target list, you know, then obviously we're not strategizing properly, but, you know, it is expected that Guam will get struck pretty early.
In as little as 2 weeks, thousands of people have died and dozens of ships and aircraft from both sides have been destroyed. The team here has played this base case scenario dozens of times, and the results are usually the same.
Our finding is that the United States and the coalition can maintain an autonomous and democratic Taiwan. So in that sense, they win. On the other hand, we note that this comes at very high cost. The United States loses hundreds of aircraft, dozens of ships. The Taiwanese infrastructure is wrecked.
While the results are grim, the war game has revealed some important lessons on what the U.S. can do to better prepare itself. One of the most urgent tasks is speeding up delivery of U.S.-made weapon systems. Taiwan is still waiting on more than $19 billion worth of U.S. weapons, many of which have been delayed since 2019.
Once the war begins, you can't get weapons and munitions into Taiwan. Unlike in Ukraine. Like the Poland situation. Right. And with Ukraine, the war began. The United States and NATO and many other countries have been flowing weapons and munitions into Ukraine through Poland. What that means for Taiwan is that it has to have all of the weapons and munitions that it needs for at least the first month or two.
While it is impossible to predict a war, the team at CSIS say that both the U.S. and Taiwan must be prepared for the worst-case scenario. And so as they continue their work, the focus is less on the results and more on the lesson that if this game becomes a reality, no one really wins. Devin Tsai, Eric Tsai, and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
U.S. President Joe Biden has warned Israel that it must do more to protect civilians in Gaza or risk losing U.S. support. In a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Biden condemned attacks on humanitarian aid workers after 7 were killed in strikes earlier this week. He urged Israel to announce and implement measures to address civilian harm and humanitarian suffering in Gaza and called for an immediate ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he expected Israel to improve conditions in the enclave within hours or days. Myanmar's anti-junta forces say their drone attack on military targets in the country's capital was a success. The country's shadow government, which includes elected politicians who were kicked out in a 2021 coup, says its defense forces undertook the attack. They say it comes as the junta enforces conscription and sows fear among the public, who widely protested the military overthrow of the government. The military regime called the attack an act of terrorism and says it has destroyed or seized more than a dozen of the drones. The country's military-run news broadcaster says there were no casualties from the attack. Schools in the Philippines have suspended in-person classes and resorted to distance learning as temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius bake the country. More than 1 million students across 4,000 schools have been affected. Gino Lopez spoke to Adrian Nemes, a teacher from the Philippines Central area, where most of the schools have shut down.
What is the current teaching situation like, and how are students and teachers getting by during this heat wave?
Well, unfortunately, we are having a hard time here in the Philippines, especially us from the public institutions, because we don't have enough facilities like air conditioning units. We also don't have enough classrooms. So we do not have really much of a choice, but we need to cancel our classes. We send our lessons online so that the classes, there will be continuity despite that we're not reporting to school anymore.
What are the challenges towards this sort of modular learning? Are students still able to accomplish their homeworks?
It's difficult to collect and gather outputs, especially in our side, in the teacher side, because most of the students, if not all, they would forget to submit their outputs and their schoolworks online. On top of that, not all the students, especially in the public institutions, have access to internet. For example, in the outskirts, they resort to printed modules and then give it directly to the doorsteps of the students.
And how has the heat been in the Philippines during these past few days? Were there times last week wherein it was also too hot to be in the classroom despite class not being suspended?
Actually, since the beginning of the El Nino phenomenon, there are schools who have planned certain mechanisms so that there will be continuity of the classes. We have decided to allow the students to wear comfortable clothes and do away with the uniform so that they will be comfortable inside the classroom. But unfortunately, the heat has been so excessive.
What are the calls of the teachers and students towards the local government and the Department of Education regarding alleviating these sorts of situations?
Some are asking to revert back the opening of classes to June. We start the classes in June and then we end on March, just in time before the summer season sets in. And also, we wish that we add more ventilation to our classrooms, especially in the public school, because it's not really conducive for learning. And so I hope the department would mechanize methods and ways so that we are still able to deliver the quality education that we need to, despite of a series of unfortunate events like this. So.
That was Gino Lopez speaking with Adrian Nemes, a teacher from Central Philippines. Separated by vast expanses of ocean, many Austronesian cultures trace their ancestral roots to Taiwan. Our reporter Reese Ayers went southeast to meet the Canoe Club, reconnecting those communities through common seafaring traditions.
Blessing boats with the songs of their ancestors. A ritual seen in cultures across the Pacific, taking place on Taiwan's southeast coast, where it all started. At this boat race in Taidong, paddlers from around Taiwan and beyond gather to put their seafaring skills to the test, but more importantly, to revel in the shared history of Austronesian cultures.
In every country, there is a different cultural attachment to it. So for example, in New Zealand, it is really tied to the Maori culture. And if you're in Australia, there's an indigenous culture. And in Taiwan, it's also very tied to the Aboriginal tribes in Taiwan.
Taiwan is home to over a dozen indigenous groups, many of whom have lived between the mountains and sea on the country's rugged east coast for thousands of years. Research points to these groups as being the ancestors of peoples across the Pacific.
Austronesian cultures around the world, from Hawaii to Madagascar, New Zealand to Taiwan, all share some characteristics and technologies, including deep roots in seafaring traditions.
And it's that shared history of seafaring that Yvonne Jian, founder of the Taiwan Outrigger Canoe Club, hopes to preserve at events like this race.
The culture of this island matters to me, and I want to honor that First Nation, First people of this island. And unfortunately, when I was younger, I didn't give me the opportunity to learn and get to know more of our culture, especially the indigenous people culture.
Yvonne first learned of the connections between Taiwan and other Austronesian cultures while paddling in Hawaii.
Every time I introduce myself as a Taiwanese, most of our international paddlers, especially from Hawaii, from Tahiti, from Maori, Aotearoa, they all said, "Oh, our ancestors from Taiwan."
Despite not being indigenous herself, Yvonne was inspired to start the Canoe Club after returning to Taiwan during the COVID-19 pandemic. Through her involvement, she learned about communities' fading relationship with the water. Uniting boat builders, paddlers, and ocean enthusiasts, Yvonne's mission is also about teaching water safety and educating people on the history of voyaging.
It's the first deep-sea voyaging canoe. We believe that the secessions of the outrigger canoe started from the bamboo raft, which is what we see here alongside the east coast of Taiwan.
And she's received support from the local government, equally eager to protect local traditions.
那其实在文学啊、美术啦、视觉艺术、表演艺术，
我们其实都有很多的计划在做了 ，even 那个纹身啊，就是那个 tattoo 的纹身也都有。
Professional and amateur paddlers from several of Taiwan's indigenous groups are involved with the canoe club. Li Xing Yijiang from the Amis people says sailing the traditional way is no easy task.
最困难的是肌肉的持续力，因为大洋洲它是比较长距离的航行，所以基本上都是以公里为起跳，所以就是长距离的话，肌耐力要很够。
And Kong Tek Lee from Singapore hopes even those without Austronesian heritage can get involved.
This sport kind of brings everyone together, no matter what race you are, from what background you are, how old you are. Everybody is very welcome to be a part of the canoe.
The Canoe Club has big plans for the future, including retracing maritime routes between Taiwan's main and outlying islands, and even further afield to places like the Philippines, re-establishing links between peoples who set sail for the horizon many millennia ago. Leon Lien and Rises in Taidong County for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Before we go, here are the latest figures from the earthquake. 12 confirmed deaths, over 1,100 injured, 13 missing, and 634 people trapped. Finally, check out this digital cherry blossom display in London. I'm Betty Chen. Take care and see you next time.
For more stories about Taiwan's fruits, follow TaiwanPlus on social media.